Welcome, Taurus, to your year 2020 horoscope forecast for the Sun or the Ascendant. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, I'd be honoured if you did so now. The backdrop for this year comes from the solar return for your sign, and this is going to provide a theme right through till December. So that's where I want to start out in our journey of discovery of what this year holds for you. I think the first thing we have to flag is going to be the importance of Uranus, the planet of surprises, the planet of rebellion, of individuality, the freedom fighter of the Zodiac is in your sign for the whole of this year. And as this new year begins, Uranus is forging an absolutely gorgeous link with both a combination between Jupiter, the planet of growth, optimism and good fortune, which has moved into your sector of travel, higher education and new experiences, and Mercury, the planet of communication. Now they're in your ninth house, the sign of Capricorn, but they forge an awesome link with Uranus as this year begins. So Uranus is also going to have a big impact on some new moons and full moons all throughout this year. And it's also going to forge some very positive angles to other key planets. So being open-minded to new ways of doing things, but also confronting the potential for change is going to be a big part of the success you can enjoy this year. Your natural nature is to adhere to what you know. You probably have this characteristic more than any other zodiac sign. This is because your sign is fixed. That means it gains confidence from familiarity. So when Uranus first entered your sign for that 5-month period in 2018, especially if you're born right at the start of the time that Taurus begins, you may have found that your world did start to become a little bit more unsettled, but only really because it was giving you an opportunity to recast your thinking about your identity and the way you approach things. Now, of course, last year, Uranus moved back into your sign, and it's going to be in your sign for the whole of this year. And so this angle that it forges between Mercury and Jupiter gives you an opportunity to come up with just lots and lots of brainwaves. But this goes and runs counter to your natural tendency to just seek out what's familiar and comfortable. So if you are somebody, you are a Taurus person who's been getting into the spirit of the potential for change, which was introduced first in 2008 by the planet of transformation Pluto, and more recently by Saturn, then I think Jupiter, having arrived in this area late last year as well, has really given you, hopefully, an appetite to be more experimental. And if that is how you're thinking, just know that right from the start of this year, you get this backdrop, which really gives you a wonderful platform for you to thrive by trying different things. So whether it is around technology, around where you live, how you live, the type of interests you have, the type of people that you spend time with, you need lots of mental stimulation, which can challenge some of the norms, some of the status quo, which have existed in your world for some time. And if it has seemed over the last few years that you're almost being pushed to change when you're not quite ready for it, I think Jupiter moving into Capricorn will certainly be really helpful to you. We can't deny that Jupiter in this in Capricorn is in full, F-A-L-L, but it's still going to be broadly helpful to you, and it's going to be spending quite a period of this year in a conjunction with Pluto. Now, when these two get together, good things are possible, even though Jupiter will have a 4-month retrograde this year and Pluto a 5-month retrograde. But as we start this year, if you can be very open-minded and flexible in your approach, It's going to be a massive asset to you. Now, the second thing that I think is going to be hugely helpful to you, Taurus, is that as the year begins, your ruling planet Venus is actually in a very visible part of your scope, your 10th house, your solar midheaven, in the sign of Aquarius. But also the midpoint between the location of the moon at the turn of the year, which is in Pisces, and also the sun in Capricorn, is only a degree or two away from Venus. I think this is going to give you the opportunity to showcase yourself using quite a lot of graciousness, of persuasion, of charm, and you have these characteristics in your nature because you're ruled by Venus. And so your appreciation of the good things in life, even if they're a bit novel and a bit different, coming through the prism of Aquarius, or your approach to business or your goals and ambitions, again, I think there could be some fortune that is going to break for you this year on the back of that conjunction between the midpoint of the sun and the moon and Venus in the sign of Aquarius. But your success is going to also be subject to you listening, where possible, to your instincts, particularly around your friendships and group associations. The moon in Pisces is going to be alongside Neptune. This combination can give you a real psychic potential. If you're someone who already enjoys this part of life, or you have a very spiritual dimension to your nature, this too can thrive all throughout 2020. But it's kind of like having the confidence to believe what your instincts are telling you. Because sometimes with Moon and Neptune conjunction, especially in Pisces, we can pick up all the vibes, soak it all up, become rather overwhelmed by it, or we can feel everyone else's baggage in a way which drains us. So you're going to need to apply it in a shrewd way, but you can do that for sure. But I think this is going to guide your moves about your longer term future and also about your friendships. Now, the other thing that's happening this year is that we have a big collection of energy in Capricorn at the turn of the year. But also Mars, the planet of drive and of passion, is in your 7th solar house, the sector of relationships. Now, it's only just in Scorpio, and it's actually going to be moving into the sign of Sagittarius on the 3rd of January, which is a completely different kind of vibe. But initially, the backdrop for the whole year can make you much more outgoing when it comes to engaging with other people, especially around relationships. So if you're single or you'd like to meet someone, this can make you much more on the front foot. If you need to be more competitive through your work, Mars is going to help you there. But then this collection of Capricornian energy. And we do have, as soon as the 10th, a lunar eclipse, which is going to be really shining a focus on the conjunction between the Sun and also Mercury and Saturn in the sign of Capricorn. Now, this is going to be potentially tricky over the next 6 months in the terms of, in your case, thinking about your ideas, expressing your ideas. If you do need to learn new ways of doing things, at times it may be your own resistance that you need to battle with, or it could be other people's. For example, if you want to go to college, gain more qualifications, do some kind of business on-site learning, you may have to persuade someone quite hard to listen to how this can be good for you. But by the 12th, we're starting to get a real connection between Saturn and Pluto and Ceres. Ceres is an asteroid which is to do with nurturing, and this is encouraging you to nurture yourself about your passion for knowledge. So it's saying to you, even if familiarity has proven so comfortable, like a really cozy pair of old slippers, do be open to just how much things can improve for you through learning new ideas, new approaches, or experiencing fresh places and situations. Travel is almost certainly on the menu for this year, and it could be to somewhere quite mystical, long distance, somewhere with a high historical value. It won't necessarily just be zapping up the rays of the sun, although that could be part of it. You're going to want to balance that with becoming more informed about the mechanizations of the world at large. Also anything to do with natural justice. If you're someone who's very passionate about your ideas or philosophies, you may find yourself wanting to engage with other people more. That could be writing a book. It could be investing in a blog, a website. If these are things you already do, this can be such an important year for you, Taurus. But we do get to a point by the 14th when the connection between all these energies is so strong, it's really asking you to transform not just your thinking, but also your actions around change. Now, if you welcome it, that change is going to happen that much more easily for you. But because Mars moves on the 3rd into the sign of Sagittarius, that for you, for the following 6 weeks, is going to give you an instinct for money, for business, for engaging with people in terms of the nous that you have. Your instinct can drive you in certain directions if it comes to improving your lot. So that could be around property, could be around savings, pensions. It depends on what stage you are in your life. But also it can give you a much greater desire to connect at an intimate level. So if one of your New Year's resolutions is to bring someone magical into your world, the 6 weeks from the 3rd is certainly going to see you very proactive indeed. This brings us into February, and February begins with the Sun and initially Mercury still in the sign of Aquarius, which is your interaction with the world at large. It's how the world at large sees you. It's your public standing, your attitude to status, work, responsibilities and goals. It's very Capricorian essentially, but on the 3rd, Mercury makes its way into Pisces. Now for you, this is a good sector because it's to do with friendship. It's to do with fraternity. It's to do with getting together with people. Now, of course, this is catching up with Venus, so that's lovely for you. But Mercury in this sector of the zodiac is in detriment. It's not quite so happy in Pisces. If we think Pisces is watery and Mercury is to do with logic and communication, you're going to go through a period where there could be some challenges around thinking about your longer term future, or potentially some of the people you encounter in terms of friendships or group situations might not always give you a clear take in the way that you would like, because you generally like to know exactly where you stand. But on the 8th, Venus, your ruler, leaves Pisces and relocates into Aries. Now, Venus loves being in Aries. It's quite spontaneous here. But don't be surprised, particularly if you're single between now and the end of the month, if someone comes back into your thinking who's from your past. They don't necessarily have to show up on your doorstep. It could be that you have an instinct to check someone out on social media, an old flame, or it could be that you're just thinking about reminiscing and perhaps getting together with old colleagues or old school friends. Venus going through this area could see you in an existing relationship, just mulling over things a little bit, feeling a little bit more inward and thoughtful. Nothing wrong with that, but also in a very extreme case, it could see you thinking about a relationship that's not working very well, because Venus immediately connects with Chiron, the comet which is to do with healing. And if there is a relationship that's broken, this could be a critical point almost straight away. However, the full moon of the 9th is in the sign of Leo. And this full moon, therefore, for you is balancing your interactions in your work and your worldly interactions with how it feels in terms of your own personal situation, your home life, your family life. This is a classic work-life balance full moon for you personally. And so over the next couple of weeks, if you have been spending so much time concentrating on your work, you're being asked to rebalance that with making sure that the foundations of your life, the emotional fabric and the support systems are not being compromised by your ambitions. But the 16th sees a magic moment because Mars, the planet of passion, the planet of desire, moves into Capricorn. Capricorn is an exaltation for Mars, so it really shines out here. And this is going to give you a bit more drive to be that much more daring. So if there is that relationship which isn't quite working for you, Mars moving so soon afterwards may give you a bit more confidence to step away from something that isn't actually working for you. However, Mars moving into this area can also whet your appetite when it comes to physicality, being much more active. So if you have found it a little bit difficult to adhere to any New Year's resolutions to shed some weight or to be more fitness orientated, this transit over the following 6 weeks is super. It can see you much more on the move, but it can also see you driving further, travelling further, engaging with newer ideas with even greater fervour than you had from those influences at the start of the new year. It's really going to fire up your enthusiasm even more. But also, from the 16th to the 25th, Mars forges a brilliant link with Uranus in your sign. So we're getting a theme developing here, which I predicted in my opening remarks about 220 for you, that the more open you can be, the more things will work out. But Mars and Uranus in this angle is very, very refreshing. It can kind of see you really thinking, look, what the heck? I'm going to try something, be more experimental. I'm going to live in the moment. If it doesn't always work out, so be it. It's so enlivening. It's really going to be a jolt of electricity and extra desire to be more daring, which in itself can be very life enhancing, particularly if you're very safety first Taurus. So even if you just take a small step forwards outside your comfort zone, I think you're going to find that just as gratifying as the people who decide to go and climb up a very large mountain or throw themselves out of an aeroplane for charity with a parachute, I must stress. Also, Mars in the second half of this month is forging a fantastic link with the Sun. But the Sun moves into the sign of Pisces on the 19th. But just before that, on the 17th, Mercury in this sector does go into a retrograde. And as I said, Mercury can be a little tricky in its transit through Pisces. So for the last 10 days, essentially, of this month, because of the 28-day month, I would just say to you, around friendships and plans, there could be some last-minute changes of plan, things not quite working exactly as you would expect. But the good news is that Saturn and Pluto come to the end of their conjunction, which has broadly gone on within 3 degrees for 11 months. So if it has seemed that on one hand Pluto's pushing you to make changes, and on the other hand Saturn has been resisting them at every inch of the way, that pressure is going to drop, and that's going to be very good for you. Now, once the Sun's moved and you're thinking much more about your friendships, your future plans, there could be some about turns. You may decide that something that was previously important to you has lost its sparkle. Then again, you may find yourself setting new longer term aims which are more relevant to the person you're becoming. And as I said, friendships and groups may be an area that's quite fluid. There could be some people leaving and some people coming in. Some of the leavers could be rather disappointing to you. In fact, your ruler Venus is squaring up to Jupiter in week 3 of this month, which does ask you to nail down your expectations. Human beings, all of us, can be profoundly disappointing at times, as well as profoundly lovely. So there may be someone that you're about to find out isn't quite the ideal that you thought. But take it in your stride, because the new moon, which occurs on the 23rd, also links with Black Moon Lilith. Black Moon Lilith was actually in a very sheltered part of your situation, as this new year began. It was in your 12th solar house, but it was also alongside the wounded healer, Chiron. It was actually in retrograde, so it's moved backwards, and now it connects with this new moon in Pisces. But what I would say is that if some friends are leaving your world, anyone who does enter may have a little bit of an unexpected characteristic about them, because they could be someone who in the past you would not have looked at. There is a kind of freshness to your desire to connect that's going to come through this particular new moon, and this is going to power its way into your situation for the following month. Quite exciting. So be open-minded. That is definitely the theme for this year. Now, from the 24th to the 27th, the sun's moving forward in Pisces and Mercury's retreating, and they come together. This can also give you something of a brainwave. So even though Mercury is in retrograde and there can be tangles and misunderstandings, it also can be a time when you have a stroke of genius in your thinking about something for your future, your long-term future. As you enter March, the Sun and Mercury initially are in the sign of Pisces, which for you is very much about setting those longer term aspirational hopes. So it's more about what makes your heart sing rather than neat goals. But on the 4th, Mercury inverses in its retrograde back into the sign of Aquarius. So it could be around a work situation that something that's been a bit stop-start may need revisiting. That could prove initially frustrating. But on the 5th, I want to tell you, probably one of the most magical pieces of news this year, and that is that Venus returns to your sign. But for a week, it's going to be embraced by the energy of Uranus. If you are single, this provides a wonderful window of opportunity to meet somebody new. If you're in an existing relationship, it's asking you to try to reinvigorate it in some way. Even if you and yours are essentially very content, all relationships can dip a little bit if we become a little bit too ingrained in routines and we take one another for granted. But Uranus is going to be pushing you to not do this all year. So every element of your existence, if you can freshen things up, the better it's going to be. But Venus can also be about your personal appearance. So this can be a great juncture to get yourself some new clothes, give yourself some kind of dazzling new stylistic look. Probably not choosing the grooviest words in the world, and even grooviest is probably mildly out of fashion. But you get my point. It's a time to be open to new stimulation. So if you do meet someone at this time, it really could make your pulse race. And even if you're in a relationship, don't be surprised if you're turning a few heads, which can be very good for your self-confidence. Now, from the 9th, we do have a quite magical alliance that begins. The conjunction between Jupiter and Pluto, which is going to go on until the 4th of December. Sure, they both go into retrogrades during that time, but broadly speaking, this is very enabling. So although you had that conjunction between Saturn and Jupiter that lasted for 11 months, which finished mid-February and peaked around about the 12th of January, this is going to be one that helps you to be much more at ease with the concept of change. I'm very sensitive to Taurus people because I have both my Mars and Saturn in the second house, which is a very Taurus kind of influence, and in my draconic character analysis, which is to do with the energy we bring into this world, both Saturn and also Mars are in Taurus. So I love good food, I love home, I love a certain amount of routine. So I get it. And I do feel that this conjunction between Jupiter and Pluto just is more enabling around change. And as I've said before, Jupiter and Pluto conjunctions can lead to great success, but potentially, as Jupiter goes into its 4-month retrograde, it could lead to a slowing down of your appetite for new experiences. But initially, and I think overall, it's going to be very good for you around travel, higher education, new experiences, new people, and just making you feel more at ease with the concept of shifting some elements that have perhaps played quite fundamental parts in your existence for quite some time. Now on the 9th we do have a full moon in your sister Earth sign of Virgo, and of course this is going to be facing the Sun in Pisces, but the two are both forging very positive angles to Pluto and Jupiter. So I think although this is a full moon which could bring to the fore some kind of balance that you may need to find in your social or personal lives. Are you spending too much time being a people pleaser, the 11th house, Pisces? Or are you spending enough time on your personal expression, Virgo? And what Pluto and Jupiter are saying is be a bit more daring. If you do need to make some changes, seek your truth. Don't be too guided by other people's in the following 2 weeks. The 10th is marvellous because Mercury starts to go forwards. So any niggles that have been there around the professional situation can start to be resolved. Now, Mercury doesn't come out of shadow until the 29th of this month. It's going to move back into Pisces on the 16th, although in detriment here, it's good for you generally. So if there has been a tangle around a friendship, it can be resolved in the second half of this month. Now the 20th sees the vernal equinox when we start the Western Zodiac all over again, followed by the Sun moving into the sign of Aries. But the weird paradox for you, although this is the start of the whole process for all of us, for you this is your 12th solar house. So this next month can be a time of actually reflection and withdrawing a little bit, thinking about what the last year has meant to you. You may find yourself wanting to spend time with the people that you feel most comfortable with, where there is a high level of trust. However, on the 22nd, Saturn moves into the sign of Aquarius. And on the 29th, Mars moves into this location too. Now for you, this is about work responsibilities. Saturn's going to make this transit through Aquarius through till the end of June. On the 1st of July, it retreats back into Capricorn. So you have a window of opportunity. And then on the 17th of December, we have, and the 20th of December, we have Saturn and Jupiter moving back into Aquarius. But I think right at the end of this month, if you do want to take a professional decision and you're perhaps given the opportunity to take on a lot more responsibility, this could be a breakthrough moment. It could also be a time when what you want to achieve in terms of goals and ambitions could seem a little bit thwarted. But you know, if you roll your sleeves up and show the necessary perspiration, which is Saturn, and the necessary passion, Mars, you can start to attract a lot more attention for the qualities, characteristics and skills that you have in spades. Now, of course, the Sun moving into Aries is the start of the new cycle, but on the 24th we have the new moon in Aries. The 12th house new moon is probably one of the trickiest ones of the whole year, but I actually feel for you this can be a good one if you can try to understand your deeper motivations, especially around friends, especially around widening your horizons, and especially around work. So if you do find yourself in the following month just mulling things over, just try to take that in your stride. Now, as this month comes to a close, you could also be thinking about property, because Saturn rules bricks and mortar. The 10th house is very much to do with this as well. So if you do set yourself some goals and aims in this regard, this can be an interesting time too. So this brings us into April, which has 3 standout brilliant moments for you personally. The first, on the 4th, sees Venus transit out of your sign and ingress into the sign of Gemini. This could see an almost instant improvement in your financial situation. You have an infinite appreciation of the good things in life, whether they're rustic, down to earth and natural, or have a little bit of luxury attached to them. And if you fancy some bling, you may splash out on the back of this particular transit. It also brings a more sensual vibration to bear in a romantic context too. So it's definitely one to appreciate. Also, Mercury is going to be forging a brilliant sextile to Jupiter from the 5th through to the 10th. Now, of course, Mercury and Jupiter were side by side at the start of the year in a brilliantly expansive part of your scope. Now this is an opportunity for you to connect with friends, perhaps go on some kind of group trip or arrange something for later in the year. The first 5 days of this month also see Mars continue to combine with Saturn. So this can see you really getting much more serious about goal setting, even if you're doing some research behind the scenes, with the Sun continuing in the sheltered 12th house. Now, the 8th does see a full moon, and this full moon is going to occur in the sign of Libra. And there is also going to be a clash from the 10th to the 17th, and broadly with the full moon too, between the Sun and Pluto. This is a bit trickier, to be quite honest, because what we get in here is a right angle in your 12th house, which is to do with your vulnerabilities, secrets, and also opposition that comes from unknown people. And then we have that Pluto energy, which is about power, transformation, but it can be about ruthless stuff as well, can be about people not necessarily behaving in the right kind of way. So the square between the Sun and Pluto across that 8-9 days could be quite tricky. Someone may turn out to be a little bit disingenuous, or rather largely disingenuous. This is not the best of times to be opening up to someone who doesn't have your best interests at heart, is not sincere, is not a true friend. Proceed with caution. And also be conscious that if you are travelling, particularly overseas, if you're going somewhere that has an edge, there are places in the world that do have activities in their locality which generally don't creep in to the tourist resorts. But if you are going somewhere like that, just take care of your possessions. Try to stick to the places that are well known to be secure for tourism. Don't go into localities that have a known reputation for crime. This is not me being a scaremonger. It's just the Sun and Pluto can be quite risky, but only if we put ourselves at risk. Now, on the 11th, Mercury moves into Aries, and this can kind of increase a potential for you to be thinking deeply about things, but also maybe a little bit worrisome. If there is a bit of an anxiety about someone's sincerity, it could be activated by this transit, but it's going to be relieved by the second of the amazing events that's happening this month for you. The Sun's move into your sign on the 20th, followed on the 23rd by a wondrous new moon, but that's going to be conjunct Uranus. So once more, this push to be more experimental, but you're being asked to re-engage with this more progressive, outgoing vibe just when you've been on the back foot and feeling more tender and unsure about some politics in your world. So you're not necessarily going to be instantly in the mood to just switch around your emotions. But I think generally, as you build up confidence and things go on, and also on the 25th, with Pluto going into a retrograde, which will go on until the 4th of October, just generally, just take your time accelerating forwards on any new, novel, innovative ideas or schemes you have. But one thing I would say to you is this period of the year, even if it heightens your concerns in some ways, pardon me, it doesn't mean to say that you should stop that agenda to keep pushing yourself to freshen things up. Only the things that need to fall away from your life, that no longer work for you. I mean, I used to be absolutely so into football, and I still support my hometown team passionately, but sometimes I watch football these days and it's a turn off because of all the money and the diving and the moaning at the refs and all the rest of it. And so therefore, something that everybody who's ever known me knows that I have a massive passion for has actually lost its attraction to me quite largely. So this kind of change is possible for us all, and it may come in more towards the back end of this month for you, Taurus. But be philosophical. If some people or situations fall away, it's only because you're instigating that. Even if it seems that sometimes it's other people that make the decisions, actually it's the energy that you're exuding. Now on the 28th, Mercury moves into your sign, and I think this is great. So extra confidence is going to come through here. And also in week 3, Mercury forges a fabulous link with Mars, and that's going to give you a lot more conviction, a lot more self-confidence to express your ideas, and you can be truly much more passionate and enthusiastic as this month comes to a close. As you enter into May, so you still have the Sun, Mercury, and also, crucially, Uranus still in your sign. But on the 5th, there is going to be something that changes, which is entirely beneficial to you. The North Node, known as the point of destiny, is a notional point in the heavens, and it's kind of like the emotional pull, this celestial sort of heartbeat, and it has been throughout this year so far in the sign of Cancer, which for you is very much about how you think, actually, how you think about your emotions. But it moves into the sign of Gemini, which is very much about your values, your core values, but also it does have a kind of Taurus feel for you in terms of the house system. So it's saying to you, look, this is an opportunity for you to work on your inner world in terms of your self-worth for the rest of 2020. So I think it's a very enriching change. And of course, the other complication with the North Node was that it had been oppressed quite a lot of last year by strict Saturn and at times Pluto. So I think that this is an entirely uplifting development. It's very much about your direction of travel in terms of the more karmic side of your personal development. And because you already have Venus in the sign of Gemini, this kind of comes together. It's a lovely echo of that same energy of enjoying the good things in life, but also enjoying the good things about you. A lovely change. Now on the 7th, we do have a full moon in your opposite sign of Scorpio. So perhaps the most passionate full moon of the whole year. Scorpio energy is about regeneration. Obviously it has a reputation for being direct and fiercely private in some ways, but actually fiercely frank in others, just not about Scorpio people themselves. So very interested in others, very secretive about themselves. So this intense full moon is actually going to be in opposition, not just with the Sun in your sign, but also Mercury. So what does this mean for you? I think it means that this is going to be a very critical point for relationships. So the following 2 weeks can be a bit of a testing point if you are in a relationship which isn't working quite as well. And maybe something will come to the surface, some kind of revelation. Now this knowledge, remember ruled by Jupiter, could come through the conjunction between Jupiter and Pluto, which is ongoing, because Pluto can unearth things that are hidden. And sometimes that can be an uncomfortable truth, sometimes it can be a great discovery. It just depends our relationship to that development. So I think for you, the following 2 weeks, it doesn't have to be a personal relationship. It could be a business one, it could be with a friendship, but there may be some need to be very truthful with yourself about the status of this particular involvement. But because Mercury's involved in the mix, I actually think that can be very helpful because it can bring a bit more logic to the imbalance between the emotionality of the Scorpio moon and the steadiness of the sun in your sign, but also at times potentially the stubbornness. So with Mercury there, it can just give you a bit more agility around your thinking and perhaps a desire to engage in discussion with Jupiter and Pluto's help to bring something into the open, which actually could be very healing, even if it does prove to be a little bit uncomfortable. Now, on the 11th, Saturn goes into a retrograde, and this is what's going to precipitate it moving back into the sign of Capricorn on the 1st of July. It's going to continue to go backwards until the 29th of September. And each year when Saturn does go into a retrograde, a bit like Jupiter's retrograde, it does point towards a slowdown. And the things that we do find a bit restrictive can become more so. So I think certainly through to the end of June, work could be a bit heavier going. Responsibilities may not seem quite so enticing. You may feel that the pressure, because we know we live in a very complex world of employment, and you know, it's not built for the people, let's be honest about it, and not unless we're very lucky to work in an enlightened organisation. For most people, it's built for profit, and we have to fit in around that. And that does cause pressures, particularly if you're a public servant in some way. So just be aware of this could be a time when you have to just be a little bit more redoubtable in terms of dealing with stresses and strains. On the 12th, however, Mercury moves into Gemini, and also on the 13th, Mars makes its way into Pisces. Now, Mars moving into Pisces may not be its best zone in general because of the wateriness of Pisces, but for you it's good because it enables you to mix and mingle and balance your individuality, which comes from Mars, but also be quite democratic in your approach. So individual, but a team player for the following 6 weeks. So that's really good. However, on the 14th, Jupiter does slam on the brakes too. And this also for the next 4 months is more challenging because Jupiter for you is in that sector of truth, knowledge, justice, law, travel, higher education, and all those things could provide some complications with Jupiter slowing down. It's not a time of the year to be quite so expansive. You can still try to be inventive through the energies of Uranus, but perhaps a bit more risk averse, I feel. That's much more likely to be the case. And yet, ironically, in the second half of this month, with Mars moving into Pisces, it forges, guess what? A brilliant link with Uranus. Now, this is a repeat of this aspect, but in a different location, and gives you the chance to be a bit more devil may care. But as I say, the bigger picture suggests really falling back on that side of you that likes to know what the true worth of situations is, really defining what the solid, tangible benefits are because of you're an earth sign. So for sure, be bold. It could be that you're going to be bold about friends, I think, in the second half of this month, if less so with resources. Now, the sun moves on the 21st into Gemini, and this transit is going to see a speeding up for all of us in terms of our thinking and mentality. But for you, because this is also augmented by a new moon on the 30th, that's going to link with Saturn, the planet of restriction, now in retrograde. Actually, it can be very, very good for business decisions if you do your research, if you scrutinize things, if you work out what the value will be and can understand the leverage that you can add to situations by working hard and seeing how that improves your resources, which for you, the Gemini transits are about. So I do feel that hard work and application can still have a gain for you in the following month from the 30th, but probably more so if you are really being conscious of not being too risk-taking. It's more about just putting in that hard application. As you come into June, Taurus, your sector of friendship and long-term hopes is going to be very active, as is your sector of resources. Now, marvellously, for the first 5 days, the Sun is combining with the retreating Venus, your ruler. Your appreciation of the good things in life is going to be heightened by this combination. It's also possible that you could enjoy a slice of good fortune. Mercury, dazzling in the sign of Cancer, forges a brilliant angle to Uranus in your sign. So there's every chance you can be very innovative in your approach. But it is true that for the first 18 days, the Sun in the sign of Gemini is clashing with Mars in the sign of Pisces. And that suggests that even if some good fortune does come to you, it's perhaps not the best of times to be too hasty to spend it, particularly on any long-term plans. Any get-rich-quick schemes should be avoided avidly this month, not least because from the 9th through to the 17th, Mars is going to be combining with Neptune, which can create a real distortion in terms of your desires and hopes. And whereas you may be completely sincere about something, a person you encounter may not. So just bear this in mind, particularly as this square between Mars and also Neptune and the Sun hangs over the annular eclipse, which occurs in Sagittarius on the 5th. Now for you, this is very much about your longer term resources against your everyday resources. So with that distorting influence of Mars and Neptune, it's just saying to you, don't rush to any big investment or spending or expenditure decisions at that stage. However, on the 18th, Mercury also goes into retrograde in Cancer. So just make sure that you're handling paperwork, anything to do with digital products or items or modes of transport may need some care or some kind of maintenance. But remember, Mercury retreating is also an opportunity to improve things. And the 21st sees Mercury gain support by the Sun moving into the sign of Cancer, which is water, your earth. But earth is the bottom of the riverbed, so you carry and conduct water very well. So this is an opportunity for you to think more quickly, for life to speed up. Now there is also an annular solar eclipse which occurs on the same day. So for the next 6 months, your speed of thought, your articulation, your ideas are going to be absolutely key. But it is important to understand that this eclipse is in a tense relationship with Saturn, which is right at the top of your scope in your sector of ambition. So whatever ideas you have, they kind of have to fit into the expectation of the important or influential people you may seek to gain support for those ideas. This also points towards the potential for tensions between a sibling or a parent, particularly a male parent, so just be conscious of that. However, on the 25th, Venus ends its retrograde, and if you have been waiting for some money to come to you, this could be the crucial moment. On the 28th, however, Mars moves into Aries, where it's going to be for the rest of this year. So this is a majorly important development. For you, it suggests that someone from your past or a past skill set or a past colleague could come back into consideration in the next 6 months. Now this is actually going to go on to the 6th of January next year, this particular transit, and it's extended because of Mars going into a retrograde. But it is an opportunity because sometimes Mars moving through the 12th house can help us to revisit old wounds and debris which may still be lurking around in the depths. So if there is something that you feel does need some kind of resolution, the next half year is certainly a time to grapple with it. Now as July begins, Taurus, so Mars continues in that extended journey through the most tender part of your scope. But also Saturn, the planet of structure, but also restriction, returns to the sign of Capricorn. It's going to be in retrograde through to the 29th of September in this sector. But this is going to be the last retrograde in Capricorn for approximately 28 years. So it's a real opportunity for you to gain even greater insight. Its journey over the last couple of years has probably been quite bruising at times because Pluto's been pushing you for change. At the start of this year particularly, that solar return is so much to do with embracing the potential for alteration, and yet Saturn has perhaps given you doubts, seen you self-limit yourself, perhaps in your thinking, perhaps your circumstances just haven't allowed it. But the one thing Saturn has been giving you over this last couple of years is such a rich insight into your deeper motives, your deepest values, the things that really matter. So I do feel that this is going to be the part of this retrograde through the sign of Capricorn that you can benefit most from by embracing the persistence, determination and application which Saturn asks of us all. Now, it is true that this month does have some big oppositions. The Sun continues in a very fleet-footed part of your scope, but it's going to be going opposite Jupiter, the planet of growth and expansion, and of course, good luck. So from the 11th to the 16th, if you do make a pledge about something, you're going to need to keep it. But actually, during that period of time, you could be uber optimistic about what you can achieve. And your ideas can be really buzzing and you can be full of enthusiasm. But there is an annular eclipse, a lunar eclipse, which occurs on the 5th. And this does, of course, occur in the sign of Capricorn. So this is asking you to balance the quicker thinking side of your situation, where you want to express your thoughts rapidly, engage in more stimulating strands, with how this is going to play out in terms of other people. And there may be somebody close to you that's keener on the status quo. Perhaps it's you that's still finding it difficult to just let go and embrace the parts of your existence which would see you just pushing out of your comfort zone into something new and really exciting. The 12th, however, does see Mercury go forwards after its retrograde in Cancer, which is not its best location. But from the 13th to the 18th, we do get somewhat of a celestial dust-up as the Sun goes opposite Pluto. This could point towards some kind of intense conversation, a disagreement, a point of principle. If you're involved in litigation, this can be a critical period. But if you are going to discuss something with someone, particularly on the back of the new moon in Cancer on the 20th, which goes into opposition with Saturn, it's critical that you get your facts right. So if there is something that is going to be the basis of some kind of discussion, perhaps you are exploring some kind of plan or agreement, or it is to do with some kind of litigation, it's critical all your facts are ultra clear. And because of the Sun opposite Jupiter earlier in the month, there could be a tendency to think everything will be fine without doing the hard yards on the detail. So try to avoid that trap. But on the 22nd, the Sun returns home into the sign of Leo, which for you is literally about where you feel most comfortable. So you could end the last phase of this month thinking increasingly about your environment. But it is worth also pointing out that this is a month when Venus, your ruler, is going to be in a glittering alliance with Mars right throughout the month. So although Mars is in that rather sheltered part of your situation, some kind of bonus can come to you. Perhaps it's going to be a hidden attraction to someone, a mysterious relationship. Perhaps you're going to get to know someone in a very clandestine, low-key way, or perhaps hard work you've put in the past can come back to you. But as this month comes to a close, it's all about where you feel most comfortable. It's about shelter, it's about issues of security, both physical and emotional, and it's about family issues too. As we enter August, so the sun, in that tender, nurturing part of your situation, goes into conflict with the full moon in Aquarius, which is going to see your feelings very close to the surface as this month starts to unfold, not least because there is a clash, a T-square between these two positions, the sun, the moon in Aquarius, and Uranus in your sign. So if there is something that you're trying to balance in your life between the more tender and sensitive and personal strands of your situation, it may be more difficult to keep your feelings under wraps, even if you are someone who's pretty taciturn and cautious about sharing your feelings. I think they could just come out and come into the open. If this does happen, then try to go with it, Taurus, because I think what Uranus is going to be pressing you to do all through this year and over the next 6 years is to be the most authentic version of yourself as possible. And sometimes that could shake things up. And with Mars in your 12th house now, you may be surprised by how much more tender you can feel at times. Still, on the 5th, Mercury does move into Leo too. Now, it's actually happier in Leo than it is in Cancer. But for you, this is an area where you need to be sure that you're not letting any thoughts or emotional thoughts circulate around your mind without actually sharing them to the person that you do need to be open with. And because in the first 10 days of this month, Jupiter and also Mars are in a square, there may be the potential for you to actually be much more forthright in the way that your sign can be known for once you are stirred. And of course, Mars is in that tender zone, and Jupiter is in a very frank and a very fair-minded part of your situation. So this could prompt you to have your say if it's needed. But from the 5th through to the 22nd, it's Mars that's in conflict with Pluto, and this is a much more testing aspect. Mars, again, in your 12th house, Pluto in your 9th house. Perhaps it's going to be someone else who's pushing you to reveal something that you want to keep to yourself. In a romantic context, this could mean that there is some kind of powerful relationship developing, or perhaps there is one that is struggling somewhat, particularly if the emotional dimension isn't feeding you and nurturing you in the way that you would like. Fortunately, on the 8th, Venus moves into the sign of Cancer, which is delicious for you. It suggests that even if there are some complex or challenging discussions to be had this month, Venus gives you the opportunity to just lighten the message, to present it in a bit more of a diplomatic way. And in fact, from the 11th through to the 21st, the Sun forges, ironically, can you believe it, an amazing link to Mars. So you can get some kind of return or payback on something that is linked to past skills, talents, investment, a past person. It could be someone within your family, and there's some kind of building up of energy which can really delight you. Now, also on the 15th, Uranus goes into a retrograde in your sign. This is just saying to you that whatever you've been staking in terms of your desire for extra freedom, it is worth going for. It's not just about physical freedom after all, is it? It's about how we actually feel about things. So do tend to think more about the spiritual and emotional dimension rather than the physical side of your existence. But the 19th sees a glorious new moon in Leo, which does link to Mars. So for the following month, if you wanted to change where you live, for example, this would be the opportunity to actually put into practice a long-held plan or hope, which has been on the back burner in the most thrusting and dynamic of ways. But delightfully, on the 20th, and followed on the 23rd, the Sun and first Mercury, then the Sun, move into your sister Earth sign of Virgo. And this brings a much lighter, more frivolous, more sociable, more outgoing vibe to bear as this month draws to a close. It is true in the last knock-ins of July that Venus and Pluto are in opposition, which can bring politics to the fore in a relationship, but it could also bring someone into your circle that you hugely are attracted to. And the main thing to remember when Venus and Pluto are in more challenging aspects is just what are the motives, particularly around sex or money. But in the last 2 weeks, it is true that Mars does also hit traffic when it comes to Saturn. So I just feel that any psychological pain or issues that have been kept hidden away for some while, or perhaps you thought were well and truly resolved, could surprise you this month and come back into the open. But by the end of the month, I do feel you have an opportunity to get a different perspective on these things, and actually could feel quite relieved that there has been this opportunity to let unresolved conflicts come to the surface and be released. As you come into September, Taurus, there is a powerful influence which runs on from August. This sees a clash between Saturn and Mars. If you imagine trying to drive a car with the handbrake on and perhaps one foot partially on the foot brake, you'll get the idea. Saturn is in that expansive part of your scope, but of course Saturn is not to do with expansion. However, there is one really important counterpoint to this influence, and that is that on the 13th, Jupiter in the same sector as Saturn goes into forward motion. So if you have been going through some kind of slowing down in terms of that expansion that was there for you at the start of this year, I do feel that things can speed up, but you do need to be mindful that frustration can come about if there are still issues in the background of your situation which are not resolved. And with Mars going into a retrograde on the 9th, it is important to give yourself permission at times to understand, is there any outstanding politics that you do need to really look at in order to liberate yourself truly to move on. But talking of liberation, the full moon in Pisces of the 2nd links brilliantly to Uranus in your sign, which although retreating, I think this gives you the opportunity to think about the spiritual side of liberation, and especially around the friends or close alliances you have, or even around your love life. Time management is going to be an important part of this over the following 2 weeks. But it's one of the better full moons. It's almost like you're going to have a various amount of options, and it's about choosing the right ones. You can see there is a need to be conscious of anything from your past which is influencing your here and now. And that may mean having some kind of help, discussion or advice from a decision maker or an advice giver that could be a little bit painful. But once Jupiter goes forwards, I do feel that the air is going to be moving, turning over better for you. And in fact, Jupiter and Mercury are forging a very positive alliance all through this month. On the 16th, there's also a new moon. So this is the opportunity, once you've decided who you really want to be spending your time with, how you can embrace it more fulsomely in the following month. It is the case, however, that Mercury does go into a tense right angle with Pluto in the last phase of this month. And I just feel that the detail of situations suggests that if you get too bogged down in details and you lose sight of the big picture, that won't be helpful. But equally, the same can be true in reverse. So making sure that you are precise, yet staying open-minded is going to be a great help, because the energy of Virgo can see us all becoming a little bit too focused on a narrow strand of activity rather than keeping abreast of the wider spectrum of energies and events. But the 23rd sees the Sun move into the sign of Libra. Libra energy is about balance, it's about fairness, it's about discretion, and for you, it's very much about those details again, but of course not coming through the more precise guise of Virgo. So it's more about the detail of what feels in balance for you in your situation. The 27th, however, sees Mercury move into Scorpio, which is sensational for you because This helps you around relationships particularly to not take the details quite so seriously and be a bit more detached and see that if people are behaving in a different way or have a different perspective, then that's okay, that's up to them. Now, I mentioned before that when Saturn went back into the sign of Capricorn on the 1st of July, that it would end its retrograde on the 29th of September. And finally, we get to that end. Now it's going to go forwards and enter your sector of success on the 17th of December, bringing about a new journey for you, a new exciting journey. Obviously, it had a little bit of a taste of this earlier this year, but this is going to be for a full 2 years, where extra responsibilities, new obligations, but also a new attitude to the demands of life can develop, which could see you powering to the top in whichever field or endeavour is really important to you. October sees a marvellous event, Taurus. It sees 2 full moons. The first on the 1st and the second on the 31st. So we have a blue moon, the first since March 2018. But the first of these is occurring in the sign of Aries, where Mars is. So this can be quite tender for you. Perhaps something will come even more into the open, which perhaps could be a little tender. Also, for the first 3 weeks of this month, Mars is clashing with Pluto. Now, this again could be quite volcanic. Something could be pushed into the open which is uncomfortable. However, on the 3rd, Venus makes its way into the most magical part of your scope, where it's going to be for the following 28 days. This really can see you sparkle when it comes to your romantic situation, or just feeling much more alluring and attractive inside yourself. The 8th, however, to the 21st, does see the Sun go through a series of right angles with Saturn, Pluto and Jupiter. Now, this is a cardinal-led square because of the Sun being in Libra. So for you, it just points towards that this phase of the year, not taking on too much. It's going to be important to focus on what's really necessary. So don't spread yourself too thinly and eliminate the things that do bog you down. You might feel a bit guilty at times because there is going to be a need to make sure that you fulfill your obligations, but that could see you feeling frustrated about not following your own mores. On the other hand, you could follow those and then feel that you should be doing the things that other people may be pushing you to take note of. So it's a little bit of a push and shove, but it is about formalising what's important in terms of your priorities. However, on the 14th, Mercury does go into retrograde in your sector of relating. And although Venus is giving you that huge boost in terms of neat romance, the key here with Mercury's retrograde in Scorpio is making sure that your listening skills remain as sharp and attentive as possible. The 16th sees a new moon in Libra, but this also is going to be squaring with Saturn and Pluto. So once again, you could be pushed to try to balance your priorities. However, from the 18th through to the 24th, Venus forges a magical alliance with Pluto. And if there is somebody who's really having a big effect on you, the chances are you can feel the depth of experience and connection with that person like never before. Or is it someone new that's set to come into your world, and with Mercury going backwards, just who might come as something of a surprise? On the 23rd, however, the Sun moves into your opposite sign of Scorpio, and this is great because this can offset some of the negativity of the retrograde, and this is all about the interaction between you and others. It's about you being more assertive in terms of your boundaries, perhaps even more competitive, but it's also about becoming more conscious of what you need from your interactions with others and letting them know, but also getting clearer about what they want from you. The 28th sees Mercury inverse back into the sign of Libra, which is a bit awkward. maybe there is a finer detail that does need some more attention. It could relate to some kind of appointment that's been off and on. But Venus moves into its second home zone. It doesn't just govern your sign, it also governs the sign of Libra, and it moves into Libra also on the 28th. And this is a sweet spot for Venus, and it's just suggesting that if there is someone that means a lot to you, you could feel a bit more self-sacrificing over the next 28 days, or it's possible that at work an attraction could develop between you and someone who up until now you've only seen as being a colleague. But that brings us to the 31st and that full moon, which is going to occur in your sign. So this is fascinating. I think this is going to be a key moment in the whole year for you to assess your relationships, particularly in the following 2 weeks and therefore the first 2 weeks of November. Is something really worth really committing more time and energy into, or is this the point where you have to make a decision? And all that energy that's been pushing you all through this year and partly through the last 2 years to make sure that you can be the person you really want to be is all going to come home to roost. So November dawns, we still have the potency of that full moon in your sign. And on the 3rd, Mercury goes forwards in the sign of Libra. So that niggling detail could start to unravel positively for you, but you still have the sun in the sign of Scorpio. So the option is there to try to mediate, to try to find consensus, to try to work more cooperatively, to find any solution to if there has been a niggle on the back of that full moon. But on the 11th, Mercury returns to Scorpio, and I think that's going to really help the whole process. And then by the 19th, Mercury comes out of shadow, gets back to the point where the retrograde first began. So if it has been an on-off situation around a relationship, or just your own thinking has been a bit clouded or uncertain, or there's been different stops and starts in various ways, it can be resolved by that point. Also, on the 14th, Mars begins to go forwards. And it has, of course, been retrograde since the 9th of September. So this is a chance for some of that more psychological energy which has been washing around as it's made those squares with Saturn and Pluto to just come out more naturally and help you to just come to terms with things. Perhaps it's even the shadow side of your own desires, because maybe you've surprised yourself over the few months previous to this just how much something has meant to you, or will it be someone? By the 15th, the new moon, which occurs in Scorpio, is sensational. It forges a beautiful link with Neptune. And if ever there was a time which is going to take you right through to the middle of December when you could really find the connection that's right for you, that's really sweet at a spiritual, physical, and also emotional level, it will be on the back of this one. But on the 22nd, the sun does arrive in the sign of Sagittarius, which is very much about transformation for you. It's your 8th solar house. But on the same day, Venus moves into Scorpio, which of course is sensual, is passionate, and is quite frankly quite sensational for you. So in the run-up to the festivities, this gives you the chance to really be emanating a very sultry vibe that could draw someone to you at quite an exciting level. Also on the 29th, Neptune starts to go forwards. If your idealism has been pulverized by your pragmatism, or life has just seemed to have got on top of you at times, this change will help. The 30th does see another eclipse, this one in Gemini. So here you're thinking about balancing your everyday expenditure against your longer term expenditure. But guess what? This also links to Uranus in your sign, but in a positive way. So Uranus is turning out to be so incredibly important and influential all through this year. And I would say that this is really about you making sure that as an individual, any commitments that you make, whether they're financial or emotional, don't compromise your need to be a free spirit too. But that brings us into December. The last month of this incredibly powerful year, a year which gave you 4 months opportunity to improve your finances, but also has been asking you to look at some of the things that may have been out of sight in your subconscious or from your past. But on the 3rd of December, Mercury moves to join with the Sun into the deep and passionate 8th house. Mercury here is brilliant for business. It's not too late for you to be thinking about these kind of practical resources. But of course, the 8th house is also at a spiritual level, and something could be evolving for you that's very, very deep. Something that you may want to let go of, or something you may want to reprise, or something you want to rebirth, because that's the whole process of the 8th house. But on the 14th, we have a total solar eclipse. But the bonus for you is that this links with Mars. So for the last 2 weeks of this year and the first 5.5 months of 2021, you can use the insights that you've been gaining over the previous 6 months with Mars's help to actually launch yourself into the end of this year and the start of the following one in such a dynamic way, because you're tuning into your deepest desires like never before. The 16th also sees Venus move into the sign of Sagittarius, and that could see some kind of financial reward, a legacy, an inheritance, some kind of business success, or a partner could have some kind of breakthrough, or a property matter could go successfully for you before the end of the year. But then crucially, Saturn climbs into the sign of Aquarius, where it will be for the following 2 years, and then on the 20th is followed by Jupiter. Jupiter's transit through the sign of Capricorn, as I've said before, is not at its best. But going into the sign of Aquarius, for you, it's very much about success, this combination. Yes, Saturn's about structure and potentially restrictions, but Jupiter's about growth. So with hard work, as this year draws to a close, you can be formulating your plans for next year or achieve some kind of breakthrough around a key goal or ambition. And the Sun moves along with Mercury on the 21st into Capricorn. So the whole change agenda, which was sparked on the back of your solar return at the start of the year, does come back into focus sharply. But ironically, there is a full moon on the very last day of this year in the sign of Cancer. So the polarity that started on the back of that lunar eclipse of the 10th of January between the 3rd and the 9th houses for you is still going to be influenced. So there's still going to be a lot of talking, a lot of thinking this year. But I think the North Node and Venus in your 2nd house and Mars in your 12th house are really the key factors that influence this year. If you'd like to know what 2020 will hold for you as an individual based on your time, date and place of birth, please see the link beneath this video. You can order your 12-month forecast. In 2019, you can get the rest of that year free and the whole of 2020. Or if you order in 2020, you can get fully 12 months from the time of the order. But for now, it's been a real pleasure being with you. Good luck, Taurus, and goodbye.